Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Greetings, Ken.
Hey, we're back again. Back again. The Sabbath has begun here, and we are at episode 244, believe it or not, 244 of Line Upon Line. Tonight, one of the proofs of the Bible, Daniel's 70-week prophecy. One of the proofs of the Bible, which is Daniel's 70-week prophecy. And we have Kelly with us and David, and of course, Dr. Ricks. If you would start us out with a joke or two, or however many you have.
Okay, just bear in mind, Daniel is full of prophecies which prove the truth of the Bible, but we're only going to just look at one, the 70 weeks prophecy, because it's obviously an important one. But let's start off with a really interesting joke. It's called St. George and the Dragon. St. George and the Dragon. It's the name of this inn. A man comes to the inn with St. George and the Dragon name. He knocks on the door. Lady opens up. He says to the landlady, I'm really hungry and starving. Could you just spare a little food for me? The lady looks at him and says, no, slams the door. He knocks on the door again. He says to the lady, could I have a few words with George? She was the dragon lady, of course. I know somebody said, you've never met a dragon lady. Yes, I know. Okay, this one's called Say What? Bob, these jokes require you to listen carefully, too. Bob was in his usual sitting chair, reading the newspaper, listening to the radio for breakfast. And he read the story about this really, really beautiful actress who's marrying this football player who's known for being a jerk and having the lowest IQ in the NFL. And he says to his wife, to Marlene, his wife, I'll never understand why the biggest jerks get the most attractive wives. Marlene replies, why, thank you, dear. Right, honey? I'm sure some other ladies, never mind, among the podcast leaders who said the same thing. Okay, this one's called The First Flight. A young couple was having their first fight, and it was a big one. After a while, the husband said, when we got married, you promised to love, honor, and obey. The bride replied, I know, but I didn't want to start an argument in front of all those people at the wedding. But now you know why she said yes. Okay, this one requires a little extra thought. It's called I Don't Speak Dog. I Don't Speak Dog. A guy gets a new dog. He's a nice Jewish man. He names his dog Einstein. And he teaches the dog a couple of tricks. And he says, this dog is really smart. So he gets a chance to show off Einstein to one of his friends. So he calls him over. And Einstein is sitting on the couch, and there's a newspaper over there. Einstein's looking at his master, wagging his tail, smiling and grinning, wagging his tail, smiling and grinning. The guy points to the newspaper and commands the dog to get the newspaper. Immediately, the dog runs over, climbs onto the couch, sits next to the newspaper, looks at the newspaper. All of a sudden, his tail stops wagging. He's not smiling and bright and all that. He looks up at his master and he whines. He says, as I look at the newspaper, all I see is bad news. Bad news. You think this is easy, the dog says, wagging my tail all the time. Oy vey. And you think it's easy eating that junk you call designer dog food. It's too salty. Gives me gas. People who design that aren't dogs. The neighbor is absolutely amazed and stunned. And astonished me, he says, I can't believe it. Einstein can actually talk. He speaks. You ask him to get the newspaper, and he starts reading it. And the man says, I know, says the dog owner. He's not fully trained yet. I said to him, kvetch, which he thought meant kvetch, which means read and complain. I know I muffed that. Kvetch in Yiddish means read and complain instead of fetch. Yeah, I'll try to work on my Yiddish jokes next time. At any rate,
so I'm coming out of the store. The guy asked me if I want a subscription to the St. Pete Times, which is like Pravda West. And I looked at him and I said, but I don't own a ferret.
That's what this dog felt about the newspaper he was reading. Fake news. I tell you what, you listen to the fake news and you think the country's about to completely collapse.
It may be.
And maybe it is, but I think, well, we'll see.
They're willing to collapse everything if it means to get rid of Trump. And to send a message to anybody else that thinks they might get any ideas about getting in on their swamp,
Yes.
Actually, I do believe many of them would prefer that the tax cut failed and the economy was in the dregs if they thought it would help them politically.
Of course.
That's right.
Care less about the poor workers who'd be out of work.
That's right.
I really think that. I remember this. It'll probably get me in trouble, but they say that an rising economy lifts all boats. Well, when Trump said that black unemployment was, at least since they've been keeping that kind of records, on all-time low, and the Black Caucus sat there looking in pain when he said it at the State of the Union, I thought, that is pathetic, isn't it?
Yes.
That is pathetic.
Mm-hmm.
They would prefer for the things to be bad in the inner city. Well, I'll get off the subject. Probably offend some people, but I thought that is pretty pathetic.
Yes.
So brace yourself for more fake news. They'll have you all rattled. Anyway. Well, let's look at the 70 weeks prophecy. Daniel read Jeremiah, and he knew that from the time that Israel would spend, Judah, the southern kingdom, would spend 70 years in captivity in Babylon, and then they'd be allowed to come back to the Middle East and rebuild the temple. 70 years. So he decided, but the way it was set up, they have to repent of their rebellion against God because they were diving into pagan religion like with both hands full. So Daniel 9 is a beautiful prayer. Daniel 9 gives the prayer. He says, we have sinned. He gives the prayer and asks God to accept the prayer for Judah and to restore them, kind of quoting God's own words back to him. And the way it's written up, it appears that Daniel's prayer did trigger it. By the way, the reason Daniel didn't go back when the exiles went in a few years, Daniel was probably 85, 84, and he couldn't have survived the trip. And he was of more value there at the throne than he was, in the trip. That's why he didn't go. But it was really an important thing. Let's look at our first two slides, Ken.
Now, where did you want the diagram at?
Oh, probably number 1, 2, 3, 4. Probably somewhere around after Daniel 9, 25, 26, and 27. If you can throw it in there somewhere.
There we go. All right. All right. We're going to start off in Daniel 9:1. All right. In the first year of Darius, the son of Ahasuerus, of the lineage of the Medes, who was made king over the realm of the Chaldeans, in the first year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by the books the numbers of the years specified by the word of the Lord through Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. O Lord, righteousness belongs to you, but to us shame of face, as it is this day to the men of Judah, to the inhabitants of Jerusalem and all Israel, those near and those far off, and all the countries to which you have driven them, because of the unfaithfulness which they have committed against you. O Lord, to us belongs shame of face, to our kings, our princes, and our fathers, because we have sinned against you.
The one thing Daniel understood is that God has so much power, I guess, intelligence, cleverness, even though we're in a world where people are free moral agents and Satan is out to mess things up, God still has the power to control events. So if he said the southern kingdom of Judah would be coming back in 70 years, it was going to happen. And of course, there are books in the Bible that are there, what we call the return from exile books, like Ezra, Nehemiah, and then some of the minor prophets, but those are the main ones, Ezra and Nehemiah, that talk about coming back from the Malachi's involved too, but those are main ones, coming back from the exile. And that's when modern day Judaism, as we know it, really started to develop, when the Jews came back from captivity. The one thing the Jews did, and at first I think, and they meant well, so this is not being critical, and I think it started well, but over the centuries, because they said, well, we were sent on exile because of Sabbath breaking and idolatry. So they built a whole series of rules around rules and laws, so nobody could even come close to using idols or breaking the Sabbath. And at least in some cases, they made matters worse. That's why Christ complained about the Sabbath rules. It made people miserable. They didn't really understand. But knowing human nature, isn't that normal for human beings to overdo things?
Mm-hmm. You know, in the holy days, in the Sabbath is a holy day, should be a blessing. We should look forward to. I do, because I get to sleep in. You know, it's a day that you should rest, and then you go and you spend it with your spiritual family. You know, very few people in my family are in the church, and so for me to go and to be with my spiritual family is very important. You know, just a thought about that. But the you know, 615 laws or something about the Sabbath that they've come up with, and it's nothing in the Bible should take 1,615 explanations or whatever. You know, it should come from within.
Yeah, that's the thing about humankind, though, is that we get in our head and we do it for good reason. I mean, people who do it tend to be sincere, but to me, what you're saying is that, you know, okay, here's what God says, but we can make it better, and so we'll do all this, which will help us do what God said, because we can make it better. And the problem with mankind's always been, we've never been able to do just what God said. If we just did that instead of trying to figure out how to make it better, things would get better. But we're always trying to take what God says, then build around it and build onto it. Because honestly, I mean, I think it's just deep down, the physical side of us just is that we think we can improve on what God's already put out there.
That, and you see others that are not doing it to the standards you think it's supposed to be done at. So right. You've got to come up with an even more difficult standard, you know, so that as they blow it, they're still within the standard that's acceptable.
Like, you give religious power to men over too long a period of time, they're going to abuse it. I heard this joke. Guy was talking about generally Protestant churches in general. He said, either we go to one or two extremes. Either we sleep in the pews or we're jumping over the pews. He was talking about the charismatics versus the more staid churches, but I knew what he meant. These words are written by Daniel 538 BC, but a lot of prophecies are here. And I think one of the things that we can say, an angel came and gave Daniel, it really goes from Daniel 8 through 10, actually even all the way through 11, but these prophecies, but Daniel just wanted to be sure they would get back, and they were near the end of the 7 years, back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. But Daniel got more than he asked for. The 70 weeks prophecy is really, it did reassure him that they would go back in a few years back to the Middle East, but also it told them when the Messiah is coming. I think it's dual, first and second coming. And that's why it's such an important prophecy. Let's go to the next slide. We'll kind of break it down and look at the meaning of it.
Isaiah 46:9. Remember the former things of old, for I am God and there is no other. I am God and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand and I will do all my pleasure.
And like we mentioned the other day, one of the prophecies that's in there that the ancient city of Babylon would never, ever be rebuilt. And God elaborates a lot more about what would happen to it. And several people have tried to rebuild it. Such a great city on the Tigris Euphrates. Every time disaster happens, it is still unbuilt. But there are a lot of prophecies in the Bible. When understood, God can't seem to break that cycle. One thing that I always think, I know I'm jumping a little bit ahead of myself, but when you read, especially Daniel 11, and you get an ancient history book, Daniel predicts with detail the battles between the king of the north and the king of the south for several centuries, every detail. There's no way he could know that. He even predicts the name of the Persian emperor. It even predicts the Greek Empire centuries before they were a factor. And of course, scholars are just driven crazy. There's no way that could be true. The Jews must have somehow cheated. But here's the point I'm getting at. I know they like to try to pretend they cheated, but I don't think there's any way that could be done. But Daniel also predicts a united Europe, Holy Roman Empire, coming back with 10 kings. Isn't it interesting that Europe has been trying to unite for years? Because you might have thought after World War II, World War I, the French and Germans would be mortal enemies, wouldn't you?
Right, right.
And the Italians too. But those three have to be together to make a united Europe. If you look at a map, they have to be.
I mentioned to a guy today at lunch, and he's a really smart young man, and I said, is Europe and the world kind of looking like it did before World War II? The way that the politics, the economy, Germany is very strong. They've got some issues, but Japan now is building an army with no enemies that I know of. And does it looking to you, and he doesn't know anything about the church, like Europe is looking and America is looking similar to the way it did before we had World War II? And we're eating lunch, and he said, you know what, it is. It really, it looks like that to me. And to me, I see us everything being put into place again for another world war.
And bear this in mind. I know it's going to happen. Maybe the details and the timing we don't know, and that we can discuss that in a few minutes to get to the end of the program. But I guarantee you, a Holy Roman Empire, which was always in Central Europe, but this is going to be so big, people are going to be awed by it. And that's part of the prophecy when you read it. So it's got to be a big thing in the Central Europe. And we'll have 10 kings. And remember, Daniel predicted this 25 centuries ago. 25 centuries ago. There's no way he could know that except God told him, and God controls events. And people can laugh at Daniel in the Bible, but Daniel's been a book that's really given scholars a hard time, and the 70 weeks prophecy is one.
I found it interesting that most Jewish people don't like the book of Daniel. They don't read it, and they don't use it. Probably because it gives a lot of credence to Christ being born and being the Son of God. And they don't want to accept that. But found that interesting that an Old Testament writer, a prophet, a wise man, that one they want to kind of skip over.
I did hear this on the radio. There are more and more Messianic Jews in Jerusalem. I mean, they're Jewish, but they believe that Christ was the Messiah. He came to die the first time. And one of the scriptures that's been pulling them is a 70 weeks prophecy in Daniel. That's been one of the scriptures that's been leading to their conversion. So let's look at the next slide, Ken, please.
All right, Daniel 9:24. 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city, to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy.
Okay, I broke this down into the 7 things that verse says. Just want to mention them real briefly. The number one thing it says, to finish transgression. You can kind of see it on the screen there. To finish the transgression. This is actually, of course, dual, but it did finish the transgression of the Jewish people so they could come back from exile back to their home. The duality is the Jewish people and Israel total, including the northern 10, will finish their total transgression when Christ comes back. And Israel will then be a very, very blessed nation. But it did finish their transgression, and they came back to the Middle East and were there for 4 centuries and rebuilt the temple and all the things that we know about. The second, to make an end of sins. I believe this is, like a lot of prophecies, it has duality. Christ fulfilled it in that he died to pay for our sins. But the dual part is when he comes back the second time, he will stop the world from sinning, lock up the devil, and so he'll make an end of sin in that way too. But he did it in 31 AD, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. The third one, to make reconciliation for iniquity, and basically through the death and resurrection of Christ on the stake, he did that. You can only, by the way, even if you're a very, very good person, your goodness cannot earn you salvation. You can't be reconciled because you've made some mistakes, no matter how good you are. So Christ's blood reconciles us. Number 4, to bring in everlasting righteousness. And obviously, that's also part of what Christ does. He brings in everlasting righteousness through the work of his Holy Spirit. It covers our sins. Number 5, to seal up the vision. We believe this means that everything will be fulfilled, and it will. We get to the very end when Christ comes back, then all the prophecies will be fulfilled, and the world will be in paradise, and it will be wonderful. Isn't it a good thing to know that when all these prophecies are fulfilled, maybe less than 20 years from now, the world would be in paradise?
Yay. Wonderful.
Yep.
Looking forward to that.
because as I think Mark said, in the end we win,
Yes.
and forever. That's the big part. Forever. Seal up the visions, and to anoint the most holy. Now, let me see if I can explain it as I believe it is. Anointing the holy of, when they anointed the temple, they had to anoint the sacred lamb and the holy of holies in the temple. But the truth is, when Christ died in 31 AD, he didn't, actually the veil was rent in the temple, and it's in John 20. He actually ascended to the real Holy of Holies, which is at the Father's throne. He was accepted as the first of the first fruits, and he was anointed by the Most Holy, and that basically makes him our high priest forever. So Christ fulfilled that when he died, 31 AD, anointed the Most Holy. So all those things have been done. So now let's look at the timing of the 70th week prophecy. I'm going to give you a short version of it. Go ahead, Ken.
What was number 7? Because it wasn't on that list.
To anoint the Most Holy.
Okay.
Right.
I thought that was
the
6.
most. Oh, 6. Oh, okay. What did I leave off? Did I leave something off in my description? It's just certainly very possible. What did I leave off? Well, I think I got them all.
Okay.
Bring in everlasting righteousness. God does that too. I mean, through Jesus Christ. Okay. The key thing in the 70 weeks prophecy is 70 times 7 is 490. The Bible has a principle in Ezra 4:6, a day for a year. So that's 490 years. However, it's really 69 weeks. The 70th week of the Messiah is cut off in the middle. So it's really 69 weeks, which is 483 years. So 483 years from 457 BC, when Artaxerxes sent the message to end the captivity for the Jews to return. When you do all the math, it comes down to 27 AD. That's when Christ started his ministry at age 30. Then you add 3.5 years of his ministry, you come to 31 AD in the spring, and that's when Christ was cut off or crucified. Those are the key dates to remember. Okay, let's look at some of the upcoming slides, Ken. I just want to go over that date because you'll get, by the way, if you see dates that are slightly off by 1 or 2 or 3 years, scholars often do that because they don't want Wednesday, because that's the middle of the week, which fits the prophecy, of course, middle of the week, Christ's been cut off, and then resurrection at the end of the Sabbath. They want a Friday crucifixion, you know, because that's mainstream Protestant doctrine. And most of these guys work for these Protestant theological seminaries. They don't want to get in trouble. So some of them try to squeeze 1 or 2 years out so they can get around that calendar hurdle. So if you see that in some of your commentaries, know why that's why they're doing it. Go ahead, Ken.
All right. Daniel 9:25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublesome time. And after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with a flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, But in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abomination shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation, which is determined, is poured out on the desolate.
So in the end, it is the final beast that's going to be, desolation is going to be poured out on. So it extends to him. Let's look at that chart, Ken, if you've got it available. We'll just run through it real quick.
There we go.
So you get to 69 weeks, 483 years, 27 AD. Then you get to 31 AD, cutting off of the Messiah. Now, there are ways you can argue for a few other things, but I think most of us think the last 3.5 weeks of that 7th week, the 70th week,
Days.
the last 3.5 years, which represent the last 3.5 days of the week, will be done by Christ at his second coming. It'll take 3.5 years to get the world completely signed up. You can make an argument for duality that it was done also in 34 AD when Stephen was martyred. But I still like, basically, I think the 3.5 years when Christ comes back, he's going to finish his ministry and the bad guys will be done in. Which makes sense. And you can see, by the way, the reason this is important, when Jews looked at that, they know about 457 starting date, approximately 483 years would bring them to Christ's ministry dates. That's why Herod, when he heard people talk about it, that's why he killed the babies, because they reasoned that, wait a minute, the baby's got to be born 30 years earlier. And Herod wasn't taking any chance. He moved 2 years, buffer to kill the babies in Bethlehem. He wanted to be sure he got the Messiah. But also, as these dates got closer, the Jewish people were talking a lot about the Messiah's coming, the Messiah's coming. But can you see how, reading those verses, because there seemed to be an interminable amount of time from the 69.5 weeks to that final 3.5 weeks, and it wasn't too clear, that break in time. The Jews were expecting to be saved from the Romans by the Messiah. And it creates a lot of wild speculation. One that's really interesting, I'm not saying what mistake they made, but the Seventh-day Adventists went through some counting of days in Daniel 8 and 2,300 days, and they blended in with this one, and they came down to Christ coming back and the end of the world in 1844. And that's the problem with that interminable amount of time between the first 3.5 days of the first week and the last 3.5 days. I'm going to ask Kelly this, get your opinion, Kelly. Heard someone say, the moment somebody gets in all these dates, and they pinpoint an exact date when Christ will come back. I think they said the Feast of Trumpets, originally 1843, then they adjusted for the year zero, 1844. The moment somebody does something like that, they guarantee that God will not choose that date. What do you think, Kelly?
Well, I'd have to say that there's some credence to that thought. I mean, the only person who knows when Christ is going to return is God himself. Even Christ doesn't know. So, sure, you can guess. I mean, I could sit here and start marking my calendar and mark every day and guess every day until cows come home. But, you're not really doing anything. So, I think God's going to do what God's going to do. And, trying to guess a date, you're pretty much going to be wrong if you try. I do think that you can kind of tell the days because God does things by his word. So the holy days do lay out what's going on. So I do believe that when all is said and done, they will play a major role in the end time prophecies. But as far as picking a day, a year, if somebody wants to do that, I probably would say, I'm going to get off your bus right now.
Yeah. Now, by the way,
So did we freeze up?
I think some did.
Yeah, I did. I don't know where Dr. Ricks is.
It's a great picture, though.
And he'll come back hopefully soon if he hits the refresh button. There's a reset button. So where were we again?
Kelly was just about to explain the rest of this.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Kelly, if you'd
I
like
was-
to take it from here till he can get
No, you
back
missed
on.
that. What I said there right then is that I was getting off the bus. So I'll leave it to you two now.
You don't want to do that.
No.
Oh no, I'm thinking I do. No, I mean I think we were talking about people who are trying to set dates. When you start dealing with dates, people want to. I think against the human side of us, we want to know exactly what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, and so people make it their twig to get out on to say this is the day. I mean, I've heard time and time again, and people will, because they know that scripture says that only God knows, try to kind of wiggle around it. And well, I'm not really setting a date, but I do believe in the year 2020 that it's a good chance that these things will start coming true. It's like,
That's it. You heard it. Kelly said 2020.
My thing is this is one, I know I can't figure it out. I can't figure out how to get from here to the other side of town sometimes. But I think if we were working on our own backyard, just trying to, if you could just keep the 10 Commandments the way you're supposed to, you ain't got to figure nothing else out. It's going to take care of itself, and God's going to take care of you. That's faith. But if you got your charts all worked out, then you're trying to have faith in your own mind. And my faith is if I can just straighten up, he'll do the rest for me.
See, if you've got a date, I don't have to straighten up until the day before that date. And that's human thinking, is that I'm going to straighten up. I know I need to straighten up, but I've still got 20 years, so I can wait till, the 19th year and 364th day, and then I'll straighten up.
But my school of thought is and I live in a little town, Plant City, Florida, so we have a lot of trains. It's not uncommon to get stopped by a train, and 2 minutes later, once that train's gone by, you get stopped by the same train. I'm not kidding you. But my thing is I got 20 years, and in 19 years and 40 days, I'll straighten up. So until then, I'm going to just live this hedonist lifestyle, and then I get hit by a train. It's a country song, but I drop dead for whatever reason without doing what I'm supposed to do. My day just came up, regardless of when Christ returns. My day came up.
Yeah,
Or that bus Kelly got off of.
Yeah, and that's the thing that the human side, we don't want to think about our mortality. So I've got all the time in the world, but we don't. That's the thing. So.
Well, it's like this woman. She was the oldest person alive or something a couple years ago. She's 112 or something. And they asked her what surprised her most in 112 years of her life. What was the most surprising thing to her? And she said how fast it went.
Yeah.
So I think all of our listeners, we can talk prophecy all day long and all that. And we want to do that. It's part of us wanting to know. But the real fact is just try to get those 10 Commandments straight in your life and have faith that Christ is going to love you for that and take care of the rest of it.
Yay. Right.
Here's a thought that occurred to me, and there are a lot of different dates in Daniel that refer to when Christ is coming back, and descriptions of the beast that are kind of, when we see him at the very end, we'll say, now, that's what was meant. But I have this a thought. God is probably, just like with Sodom and Gomorrah and other places he did things, he may wait until he thinks things are so bad he needs to intervene. In other words, I'm saying this, I could obviously be wrong. God the Father may have some flexibility because there are enough different dates in the Bible that he could still make the prophecies work out, and he could still pick a number of different dates. So anybody who thinks he's, like you said, Dave, is so smart, because I've seen all kinds of people come with dates at 1989, and they had big churches, and they promoted it all over the country, and they were sure 1975. And guess what?
Wrong.
They're wrong.
Every time they're wrong.
So when you think you know, the fact that you think you know probably means God is not going to come on that date, because just the way it's worded, he doesn't come when you expect it. Now, we might know that he's getting close, but the exact date, we won't get. Now, maybe very, very close to the end, we might know, but it'd be very, very close. Maybe the two witnesses will get some information, but we'll have to see.
Yeah,
when we get there.
That's kind of what I've always said about prophecy. Prophecy is interesting, but for me, everybody has an opinion about prophecy. But the one thing I know that you can't miss will be the two witnesses when they are killed and they are resurrected, and you see all that, because the whole world's going to be partying at their death. And I remember when Saddam Hussein was killed, the reaction to the world, and I immediately thought about the two witnesses, how the people in the United States were out partying in the streets and stuff, and the world was celebrating the death of this one guy. And I was like, so can you imagine what's going to be like for the two witnesses when they actually come and they're murdered? The party that will be going on in the world. And I'm like, you can't miss that if you're looking for it. And I'm like, that's all I need to know about prophecy.
When Saddam Hussein was arrested, or whatever they did to him, they pulled down that statue of him in Baghdad and were celebrating.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow. His own capital city, they were dancing in glee. I thought, whoa. Yes. So the end of the age is one of the things that Daniel predicts. But as I said, many of his predictions in that 3rd, 2nd century between King of the North, King of the South, did come true with unbelievable accuracy. Historians have to admit it. Then that's where they don't want to give the Bible credit, because they just don't want to do that. But and the 70 weeks prophecy, it's hard to deny that Christ, that's why the Jews don't talk about it a lot either, because Christ came back when you unroll it exactly when he was supposed to. Okay, let's look at the next slide. It's good news. Hopefully we look at it this way.
All right. Isaiah 60, verse 1. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your rising.
And the way it's written, the people of Israel will be the first one that Christ comes to in Jerusalem. They already know a lot of the truth, actually. They just need to have certain things straightened out. And a lot of Gentile nations will be looking to Israel and to Christ for the light, and the light will brighten up the whole world. And that's predicted by Daniel and other prophets, and it's good to know that. By the way, when it mentions that in the previous script, it mentioned the prince would come. The way that's lined up, that prince, the great prince in Daniel, has to do with the little horn, Romans 7. And that is, when you look at all four, it's clearly the Roman Empire, the Iron Kingdom. And actually, Roman legions were so methodical. They were almost like a weapon of mass destruction. They really tore up Carthage and Jerusalem. And at any rate, they were like a real iron meat cleaver on their opposition. So it was the prince in Rome who destroyed the Second Temple, and a future prince will desecrate the final temple. Let's go to our next slide. All of this is what Daniel is referring to also.
Matthew 24:15. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place. Whoever reads, let him understand.
So this is coming. And as I said, there's a break between that 3.5 years of Christ's ministry on earth and the final 3.5. We don't know how long that time period is. But one thing seems obvious. What we speculate is that America is no longer the world superpower. And the Jewish state is so small, surrounded by enemies, they've always need a client state to give them extra protection, special weapons. And like basically Richard Nixon resupplied Israel during when they were losing the Yom Kippur War in 74, and that and their brave generals and all that, American jets being better than Russian jets, saved their bacon. But what if America is no longer the superpower, no longer a powerful military anymore, and they have to rely on the beast, the new emperor of the United Europe? The reason why that could fit a number of prophecies would be, let's look at the next slide, and I'll explain why I think it would fit a number of prophecies.
Matthew 24:16. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down to take anything out of his house, and let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes.
Now, the way the prophecy is set up, when you see armies in the process of surrounding Jerusalem, you don't even have time to go in your house and pack a light travel bag. You better get out of town before they seal it off, because bad things are going to happen to the city of Jerusalem. So what we think that means is those armies were around the Middle East, surrounding Jerusalem, but their guns pointed outward to protect them from their Islamic neighbors, supposedly. But then, after years of protecting the Jews, the dictator decides he wants to be worshipped in the temple. And the army turns itself on, because the Jews would never allow that. And it happens quickly. And as I say, that could not, there's no way they would not rely on America for their protection instead of Europe. So that means America has to decline as the world superpower. What do you think, Dave? Do you think that's a logical conclusion the church has made?
That makes, I'm sitting there listening to it and just kind of playing around in my head, but it makes perfect sense to me. I don't see the Israelis trusting anybody other than us, maybe Britain a little bit, but we've had a good relationship with them for so long. I think that they would rely on us. So for that to happen, we have got to either completely turn our back on them or be brought down to where we don't have the ability to protect them. Either way is bad. If we turn our back on them, the blessings from God will cease for us as well. So either way is bad.
And I know we all think right now that America's such a great military power, you can't see America being weak. But, you know, there was a time when people thought that the Roman Empire couldn't fall either.
If you have a change of political power in this country, it can change the whole makeup of our military. I mean, all you got to do is defund the military, and our military becomes very weak because it takes money, supplies, and things to keep our equipment up and running. And if you neglect it, even though we may have equipment, we can't use it because it's non-functional. So it wouldn't take a whole lot to put us on our knees with the right kind of,
and maybe a weaker younger generation too.
Right. They're talking, the last administration defunded so much that they were taking parts from museum aircraft to try to keep our aircraft in the air.
Mm-hmm. So, so you can see just with that, there's a chance of it happening. And like I said, I have said for a while now that my opinion is that used to, like when you go back to 9/11, it's pulled together. But now I don't think if somebody attacked the U.S., I do not believe that the country would come together. I think we would stay split.
Yeah. And well, I just lost my train of thought, but I think it's obvious that we're so at each other's throats now over everything that I don't see us ever being able to become one unified country. Maybe if we were attacked, I don't know though. I mean, there's so many people would probably take our enemy's side now that would never have done that, back during 9/11. That it's hard to believe that's the country we live in now, but it is. It's so divided, and there's like a mental illness going through this country that is got everybody's thought processes just all jumbled up, and it's not healthy.
Did anybody know? Go ahead,
I
Kelly.
was gonna say a house divided falls.
Cannot stand.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at, I think.
Yeah, and I could see that enough years go by, if we get a lot of bad things, America could decline and God take away some of our blessings. So Israel maybe feels they don't have any other choice but to rely on the Europeans to save them.
An EMP strike we would be out of the game. It wouldn't take a lot. I mean, we wouldn't even have to go to war. An EMP strike, we would be pretty much, we wouldn't have much of a fight.
Don't want to scare people too much, but my only point is right now America is fairly secure, but there's no guarantee that that's going to happen way off into the future. And that, by the way, there are all kinds of things God can do, but if these prophecies are going to be fulfilled, and I think they will, also because Judah is not that spiritual either. I mean, there are some very, very religious Jews, but there are a lot of Jews that really are very secular. They're Jewish in the sense that they keep maybe 1 or 2 holy days a year, but they're not that Bible oriented. They're not God oriented.
I had a Jewish man ask me, he says, can you be a Jew and also an atheist? And I had to sit there for a minute, and he goes, see, being a Jew is a tribe. It's a nationality. It's a people. But an atheist is a thought process. And in Israel, they have gay rights parades, and they have gay bars and all these things. So those people are Jewish people doing those things. Not unlike us.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. I guess go to our last slide as we get ready to come to a close. But you're right. And so I think, God can change anything. Any prophecy can change if the people repent. But I don't believe Israel and the Middle East is going to repent long term that much. I'm not even sure if America is going to repent that much.
All right, 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Let no one deceive you by any means, for that day will not come unless the falling away comes first, and the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worship, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God.
And so we believe that the new political leader of Europe, whatever his title, emperor, king, whatever it is, will eventually want to be in the holiest of holy sites, the temple of God, on probably a big golden throne, and TV cameras on him, and people worshiping him as God.
I'm so glad we just read that scripture, because I had this discussion a couple different times with some people. And they said, well, a temple has to be built. And this one fella says, it could be a tent. It could be a tent. It could be the temple, could be just be a tent, could go up in a day. No. This guy that wants to be presented as God and sit in the temple, he's got to sit in, he ain't going to sit in a tent and sweat in the desert. No, this guy is going to want to sit in a opulent, magnificent cathedral and say, look what I have. That's what he wants. So for us to watch for that temple to be built, I think is something to look for. I've been reading slowly through a book called Temple, and they're going through historically where when you go to Israel, all the different historical sites, and the place they claim that was the original temple, according to this writer, Kornyuk, I think his name is not the correct place where the temple was, and he's got a lot of history and behind that. So if we do rebuild the temple, one simple thing is that the stones are still kind of stacked on each other, and Christ said not one would be stacked. So an interesting thought there is that the temple may be built in a near place to where they think the temple is today, or was where they think it is. You know how that is.
In a sense, whatever temple the Jews build would be a fulfillment of prophecy. And one thing to remember, Jerusalem and the temple site, whatever the Jews decide it is considered by three religions to be holy. Both Christians, because Christ taught at the temple. The Jews, they build everything around the temple. And also Islam. They believe Muhammad rode the horse Barak to heaven from that mountaintop. I mean, we might say, well, there's no evidence of any of that, but it doesn't really matter. I'm just saying the three biggest religions are, well, more or less the three biggest. That's still the holiest site. That's why the beast might want to be there. Like you say, Dave, an opulent temple. It does make sense. As far as world affairs go, as long as America is strong, I'm assuming that the end is not going to come right away. So somebody tells you Christ is coming back tonight. Now, I mean, I could die tonight, and so it might be the end for me. But there are too many prophecies that Daniel and others wrote about. And Christ gave validity to Daniel's prophecies, by the way, by that statement we just read. There are too many things in that prophecy that have not yet occurred. So Christ is not coming back tonight. And we might die.
What happened now?
Yeah, I might die of a heart attack tonight, but Christ is not coming back tonight. Now, I know I shouldn't have said that, right? I'm not saying bad things could happen. Some war could start tonight, yes, and they could blow up Pearl Harbor or something tonight, but Christ isn't coming back tonight.
I think you're okay with that one.
I'm not. I'm on the fence. I'm not saying nothing.
You're playing it safe, right?
Wow.
Although I will say one thing, if you look at the past, it took years to build and improve the temples. With modern crane technology and all these other land graders and machines they have now that they didn't have then, is it possible they could build a nice temple in 7 or 8 months?
Oh, yeah.
I'd say probably so, yeah.
Without the rules and regulations that they have to follow here, that could be very different in Israel.
Well,
Yeah, here, EPA is slowing down
trying to
7
build
8
it,
years.
it'd take about 3 years.
It's taken
But,
them
you know,
almost
they
a
use-
year to
they
put a
use-
6-foot sidewalk here. So
You know, you see these elaborate, ornate buildings that go up now. It's all styrofoam. It's all styrofoam, and they put this little thin coat of like a thin coat of a masonry, and it looks wonderful. But they can build them fast. I seen a hotel go up, and it was nothing more than about 4 foot or 6 foot by 6 foot cubes of styrofoam. I mean, it was huge, and it was just chunks of styrofoam stacking them on top of each other around a metal frame. That's the hotel's built out of it.
Ken, you
I
go to
guess
the
it's-
nicest places.
I guess it's cheaper to heat that way too.
Oh yeah, I was shocked.
Just build that insulation.
Hey, look it up. You'll find it. You
So if you're a
can
tough guy,
stick
you
a
can punch
screwdriver
it
right
in.
through it.
Wow.
It's not a stone. It's mostly all styrofoam nowadays.
I know when I
Well, we
teach
see.
people the difference in cover and concealment, I tell them don't hide behind what appears to be concrete pillars. You think you're safe? It's just styrofoam.
Oh, I feel
It says igloo on it.
Glue.
they glue stuff. Glue goes right through it.
Yeah.
Well, only spiritual news I can think of that's news in the world is I think there's a spiritual battle for the heart and soul of America, maybe centered in Washington, D.C. There are days I feel like the evil influences are clearly winning. Other days, I'm not so sure. What do you think, Kelly?
I mean, that's the kind of way it is. It's like you said, if you listen to some news, the end of the world's here. You listen to other news, and we're coming out of it and getting ready to prosper. And so I think that's because we're on that teetering point where it's going to go one way or the other. And I personally, I'm afraid we're going to go to the negative. I don't think we're completely there yet, but I think we are starting to slide down the slippery slope, and we'll not be able to come back.
I think we got a pause in the action, because think another 4 or 8 years of you're just talking about America, and look how much of an effect we have on the world. They could be having peace talks in the Korean Peninsula for the first time in how long? And these things would never have happened. And there may be more things that we affect depending on how our politics, comes out, that we wouldn't have had if we'd have got basically a continuation of the previous 8 years. I think we got to pause for whatever reason because if we wouldn't have the whole military that we were talking about, how we could not be a player in world affairs could have happened. I mean, we could have decimated our military so much that we wouldn't have been able to protect ourselves. But that has changed, and I think for some reason, whatever the reason is, we've got to pause in the whole thing.
Regardless, I think it's because that's God's plan, and He's moving right along with it, regardless of what we do or say.
Yeah.
So
I almost find myself thinking God wanted Donald Trump to win. I know when you say that, people think that's blasphemous, but I have that feeling. I mean, God could have had Hillary win, don't get me wrong, but you get the feeling God didn't want that.
Well, I mean, I firmly believe that every ruler in every country in the world is put where they're put at because God put them there for whatever reason that He's doing. So it's, I didn't care for our past president, but bottom line is I believe God put him there, so he was there for a reason.
Yeah,
and it goes to God's plan.
No, I agree. We don't understand everything, and God is working on God time. And I don't know that He has a second clock ticking around like we do, and He's working on His time. Yeah. And gives us bad presidents and good presidents and things, because this is going to happen when God says it's going to happen and how God says it's going to happen. And, that's got to be very confusing and frustrating to Satan as well, because he's trying to make everything bad and he just can't. So.
That's right.
Well,
before we close, just ask people to come to Pentecost if you can. Pray for a good Pentecost, and pray for all of us church members that in an age where Satan is seducing people in various and sundry ways, that we can stay strong for Christ, because we don't know what's coming up next. Oh, and by the way, our next topic is going to be the Laodicean spirit. I know that's controversial, but you all know we're not afraid of controversy sometimes. I believe we'll give you the truth whether you like it or not.
I'll give you the truth whether you want it or not. I like that. On that note, I'll say thanks everyone for being here on the Sabbath with us. And we hope to see you all back here next week, and enjoy the rest of the Sabbath, and have a good night.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.